In the aftermath of Rex's latest takedown, the assembly hall erupted into controlled pandemonium. Security forces finally acknowledged what the German shepherd had been trying to tell them. There were infiltrators among the delegates, using technology so advanced it fooled quantum scanners and biological authenticators alike. But while the station's AI systems recalibrated their detection parameters, Rex had already moved on to tracking the remaining threats. Ambassador Voss felt the shift in his behavior through their neural link. This wasn't the focused alertness of hunting individual targets. This was something deeper, more complex. Rex was processing scent patterns that told a story no artificial system could interpret. How many more? Commander Hayes asked, his weapon now drawn as security teams finally took defensive positions throughout the hall. Before Ellen could answer, Rex's head tilted in that distinctive way that meant he was analyzing something that didn't fit normal. Patterns. His nose worked constantly, separating individual scent signatures from the chaos of 300 different species, environmental controls, and fear-induced chemical changes. Then his ears flattened against his head, and he looked directly at Ellen with an expression she'd never seen before. Not alertness or warning, but something closer to confusion. "What is it, boy?" she asked through their private channel. Rex's response came through their enhanced connection. Not words, but impressions. Multiple scent trails. Movement patterns that suggested coordination. But underneath it all, something familiar. Something that smelled like... "Oh no," Ellen breathed, understanding flooding through her as Rex's analysis became clear. "Commander, we need to evacuate the human delegation. Now." "Ma'am?" "The Shade Walkers aren't just impersonating random delegates," she explained, her voice tight with growing realization. "They've been studying us, learning our scent signatures, our behavioral patterns, our dot. Rex suddenly spun toward the human delegation area, his entire body coiled with the most intense alertness Ellen had ever felt from him. But this time, his focus wasn't on empty space or disguised aliens. He was staring directly at Ambassador Chun, Earth's secondary representative. Chun noticed the attention and gave them a puzzled smile. "Everything all right, Ellen?" "Rex seems a bit worked up." The smile was perfect. The voice was exact. Even the subtle mannerisms were flawlessly replicated. But Rex's senses went deeper than surface appearances to the genetic markers that couldn't be faked, the cellular chemistry that defined species identity, the fundamental biological signatures that even the most advanced shape-shifting technology couldn't completely duplicate. "When did you last see Ambassador Chun?" Ellen asked Hayes quietly, never taking her eyes off the figure who looked exactly like their colleague. Hayes frowned, accessing his mission logs. "He was in the pre-briefing this morning. Then, actually, I'm not sure. He said he wanted to review the cultural protocols before the opening ceremony." Rex took one careful step forward, then another. His movement was controlled, professional, but absolutely lethal in its intent. Every line of his body communicated the same message he'd been giving all day. Predator identified, pack threatened, response authorized. "That's not Chun," Ellen said with absolute certainty. "Rex, confirm." The German shepherd's response was immediate and unambiguous. A low growl that built in intensity as he established attack position, his weight shifting to the balls of his feet in preparation for a final strike. The Shin Thing's perfect human expression flickered for just an instant long enough to reveal something alien underneath. "Ambassador Voss," it said in Chun's exact voice, "perhaps you should restrain your animal. The other delegates are beginning to complain about..." Rex struck before it could finish the sentence. This time, there was no elegant takedown or controlled subdual. Rex's attack was pure predator instinct, delivered with military precision and the absolute certainty that came from trusting senses that had evolved over millions of years to identify threats to the pack. The false Chun's cloaking systems failed. completely under the assault, revealing the fourth Shade Walker, but this one was different. Larger, more heavily armed, and wearing technology that Ellen recognized with sick certainty. "Neural interface," she whispered. "It's been accessing our mission files, learning our identities, our relationships, our ... The Shade Walker threw Rex aside with strength that no human could possess and drew a weapon that hummed with lethal energy. But as it raised the device toward the human delegation, every screen in the assembly hall suddenly flickered to life. The images were brutal in their clarity. The real Ambassador Chun, bound and connected to extraction equipment that had drained everything from his memories to his genetic patterns. Security footage from hidden locations throughout the station, showing Shade Walker infiltrators studying, copying, and replacing key delegates over the course of months. And at the center of it all, a coordinated plan to eliminate the peace negotiators and restart the galactic wars that had made the Shade Walker services so valuable. Rex hauled himself to his feet, blood matting his fur, but his eyes still locked on the primary threat. Around the assembly hall, security teams finally had targets they could see and identify. The remaining Shade Walkers found themselves caught between artificial systems that could now track them and a German shepherd who had never needed technology to know exactly where they were. As the final shots were fired and the last assassin fell, Ambassador Voss knelt beside her partner and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," she said simply. "Very good boy." Later, as the summit reconvened and peace accords were finally signed, delegates from 300 species would ask her the same question. How had one primitive Earth animal succeeded where all their advanced technology had failed? Ellen's answer was always the same. "You built machines to see everything. We just brought someone who never stopped trusting his instincts." But privately, as she watched Rex sleeping peacefully beside her chair, she knew the real truth was simpler and more profound. In a galaxy full of artificial intelligence and technological marvels, humanity had maintained the one thing that couldn't be replicated or fooled: the bond between species that had been forged in the caves and forests of ancient Earth. And sometimes, that bond was the only thing standing between civilization and the dark. Rex's tail twitched once in his sleep, still dreaming of invisible hunters and the sense that revealed their true nature. Even in rest, he remained what he had always been: humanity's oldest partner, their most faithful guardian, and their most reliable early warning system against the dangers that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. The galaxy had learned to respect Earth's dogs, but more importantly, it had learned that some bonds transcended technology, species, and time itself. In the end, that respect might be the most important peace treaty of all. Asterisk. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with the weight of revealed secrets. Micah's hands remained frozen over his workbench, the impossible rifle gleaming under the harsh workshop lights. Around them, holographic displays showed star charts, battle formations, and casualty reports that most beings would never be cleared to see. "You're supposed to be dead," Micah said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The cloaked figure reached up and deactivated her tactical visor with a soft click. The face that emerged was striking sharp cheekbones and amber eyes that held depths of exhaustion and old pain. But it was unmistakably the face that had graced wanted posters across half the galaxy: General Salva Kor, the Butcher of Kepler. Station, the Iron Fist of the Outer Rim, the woman who had brought 12 star systems to their knees in a campaign of such ruthless and efficiency that her name had become synonymous with inevitable conquest. F was an acceptable fiction, she said, her accent now clearly identifiable as Altarian nobility. "It served my purposes." Micah found himself backing away from the workbench, though he couldn't have said why. This woman was wounded, alone, seeking help rather than conquest. But the sight of those amber eyes that had watched worlds burn sent primal fear coursing through his veins. The Syndicate Wars ended 3 years ago, he managed. The peace accords were built on lies and temporary convenience. Selva stood slowly, favoring her injured leg. Did you really think a galaxy-spanning conflict would end with handshakes and treaties? The war never ended, Micah Ron. It just moved into the shadows. The use of his real name made him flinch. How long have you known? Since the moment I walked into your shop. She gestured at the rifle, still connected to his diagnostic equipment. There are only 6 people in the galaxy who could have repaired that weapon. 3 are dead, 2 are in Imperial custody, and 1 runs a salvage shop on a mining colony at the edge of nowhere. Micah's mouth went dry. What do you want? The same thing you want. To disappear, to be left alone. She moved closer, her steps careful but deliberate. But some ghosts refused to stay buried. As if summoned by her words, the workshop's long-range sensors began screaming warnings. Micah rushed to his communication array, his heart sinking as the readings resolved into clarity. 6 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge sleek, predatory vessels that bore the distinctive markings of Imperial intelligence. They found me, Selva said quietly, no surprise in her voice. Faster than I expected, but not entirely unexpected. Imperial hunters? Micah's fingers flew across his sensor controls, trying to determine their vector and timing. They'll be here in less than 2 hours. Then we have 2 hours to decide what happens next. Micah stared at her, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. He could turn her in contact the Imperial ships, claim the substantial bounty on her head, and return to his quiet exile with enough credits to last several lifetimes. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice, but as he watched her check the power levels on her various weapons with practiced efficiency, he found himself remembering why he'd left his old life behind. The Terran Defense Front had promised. His weapons would be used to protect the innocent, to bring peace to war-torn systems. Instead, they'd been turned against civilian populations, used to enforce brutal occupation policies that made the old syndicate look merciful by comparison. Why are you running? He asked. You won the war. Your campaigns were legendarily successful. Selva's laugh was bitter. I won battles. I conquered systems. But the war? She shook her head. The war was lost the moment my superiors decided. That victory meant the systematic elimination of anyone who might oppose Imperial rule, including the very people we'd fought to liberate. Micah felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that 3 years ago, I discovered that the final phase of the Syndicate Wars involved something called Operation Tabula Rasa, complete orbital bombardment of 17 systems, not to destroy military targets, but to eliminate entire populations that were deemed potentially subversive. Her amber eyes met his. 60 billion civilians, Micah. Men, women, children who had never raised a weapon against anyone. That's impossible. The peace accords specifically prohibited targeting civilian populations. The peace accords were signed after the operation was complete. A convenient bit of historical revision. She activated a holographic display from her wrist communicator, showing orbital bombardment patterns and casualty estimates. I was supposed to lead those final strikes. When I refused, when I tried to expose what was happening, I became a liability. The Imperial ships grew larger on Micah's sensors as he stared at the holographic evidence Selva had presented. Orbital bombardment patterns, civilian casualty reports, intercepted communications that painted a picture of systematic genocide disguised as military necessity. The timestamps showed everything had happened during the final months of the Syndicate. Wars, when public attention was focused on peace negotiations rather than ongoing military operations. You're telling me the Empire committed genocide, Micah said slowly, and you are the only witness who survived to tell about it. Not the only witness, but perhaps the only one with enough evidence to make the charges stick. Sci-Fi deactivated the display and returned to checking her equipment. Assuming I live long enough to present it to the Galactic Tribunal. Micah turned back to his sensor array, watching the approaching ships adjust their course toward Loris 9. Why come here? Why risk exposure for a rifle repair? Because this rifle contains the only complete record of Operation Tabula Rasa. She hefted the weapon, its crystalline focusing arrays catching the light. Every orbital strike, every communication, every order that authorized the murder of 60 billion innocent people. It's all stored in the quantum memory matrix. The same matrix that was corrupted by combat damage. Exactly. Without your expertise, the evidence dies with me. Micah found himself studying the woman who had once terrified half the galaxy. Up close, without the mythology and propaganda, she looked tired, human. The legendary warlord of 1,000 worlds was just another refugee, trying to expose a truth that powerful people wanted buried. There's something else, he said quietly. Something you need to know about that rifle. Sci-Fi's amber eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. I didn't just help design the Sovereign series. I designed them specifically for you. The words came out in a rush, years of buried guilt finally finding voice. The Terran Defense Front brought me files, psychological profiles, combat assessments, neurological scans. They said they needed weapons that could interface perfectly with their most elite operatives. You built custom weapons based on our neural patterns? Not just weapons. An entire arsenal. The rifle, yes, but also armor systems, tactical computers, even spacecraft modifications. Everything optimized for perfect integration with specific individuals. Micah's hands shook as he disconnected his diagnostic equipment. I thought I was helping create super soldiers who could end the war quickly, minimize casualties. Instead, you created weapons that turned us into more efficient killers. The irony is that your neural patterns were the most challenging to work with. Every other operative showed standard response curves to combat stimuli. But you. He paused, remembering late nights spent puzzling over incomprehensible data. Your patterns suggested someone fighting against the programming, someone who viewed each engagement as a necessary evil rather than a desired outcome. Sci-Fi was quiet for a long moment. You helped create a monster, Dr. Room. The question is whether you're willing to help that monster find redemption. The Imperial ships were now close enough that Micah could make out individual hull markings. Heavy cruisers, built for system interdiction and orbital bombardment. Not the kind of vessels sent to capture fugitives, the kind sent to eliminate them permanently. They're not here to arrest you, he realized. They're here to silence you, along with anyone who might have helped me. Sci-Fi checked the charge on her sidearm. I'm sorry I brought this to your door, Micah, but I won't let them destroy the evidence. Too many people died for that information. Micah stared at his sensor displays, watching death approach at sublight speeds. He could still contact the Imperial ships, could still try to negotiate his way out of this situation. But as he looked at the woman standing in his workshop, a woman he'd helped transform into a weapon, who was now trying to transform herself into something better, he realized he'd already made his choice. The rifle's not the only place that data is stored, he said, moving to a secured cabinet in the workshop's far corner. I've been intercepting and decrypting military communications for years, trying to understand what my weapons were really being used for. He produced a quantum storage device no larger than his thumb. Every atrocity, every war crime, every instance where my designs were used against civilian populations, it's all here. Sci-Fi's eyes widened. You've been building a case against them? I've been building a confession. Evidence of my own complicity in everything that went wrong. Micah pocketed the device and began pulling additional equipment from hidden compartments. But maybe it's time that confession became an accusation. Instead, the first Imperial ship entered Loris 9's atmosphere like a falling star, its heat shields glowing cherry red against the pre-dawn sky. Micah watched from his workshop's reinforced observation deck as 5 more vessels took up positions around. The mining colony, forming a perfect interdiction pattern. No one would be leaving this system without Imperial permission. Impressive response for one fugitive, Scifi observed, checking the power levels on her repaired rifle. The weapon hummed with lethal energy, its targeting systems fully operational. Once again, they're not taking chances. Micah sealed the quantum storage device inside a shielded courier drone, programming it with coordinates for the nearest tribunal station. This contains everything your evidence, my files, communication intercepts going back 15 years. If we don't make it out of here, at least the truth survives. The drone launched through a concealed port, accelerating rapidly toward the system's edge on a trajectory designed to avoid Imperial sensors. It would take 3 days to reach its destination, but the encryption would hold that long. Attention residents of Loris 9. A voice crackled through the colony's emergency communication system. This settlement is now under Imperial martial law. All inhabitants will remain in their dwellings until further notice. Any attempt to leave designated areas will be met with lethal force. Through the workshop's windows, Micah could see Imperial troops taking up positions throughout the colony. They moved with mechanical precision, sealing off escape routes and establishing kill zones with practiced efficiency. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were purge troopers, specialists in eliminating threats to Imperial security. They're going to kill everyone, Zelda said quietly. Everyone who might have seen me, spoken to me, or could potentially testify about my presence here. How many people? The colony's population is approximately 3,000. She activated her tactical display, overlaying Imperial troop positions onto a map of the settlement. Mostly miners and their families. A few merchants, some off-world traders who are unlucky enough to be here when I arrived. Micah felt sick. 3,000 innocent lives snuffed out to protect a lie that had already claimed 60 billion. There has to be something we can do. There is. Scifi began connecting additional power cells to her rifle, transforming it from a precision weapon into something approaching a portable artillery piece. We give them what they came for. You can't fight an entire Imperial battle group. Even with that rifle, I'm not planning to fight them. I'm planning to make them chase me. She gestured toward the workshop's rear exit, which opened onto a maze of mining tunnels that honeycombed the asteroid's interior. The colony has evacuation protocols for cave-ins and industrial accidents. If someone were to trigger those protocols... Understanding dawned on Micah. You want to use the emergency evacuation system to get the civilians out while you draw Imperial attention away from them. The evacuation ships are already fueled and ready, standard procedure for mining operations this close to unstable stellar phenomena. The colonists could be in hyperspace within an hour if someone gives them the opportunity. And you'll be dead within minutes of showing yourself to those troops. Scifi's smile was sharp as a blade. That depends on how well you programmed my equipment, Dr. Rune. The workshop's proximity alarms chimed as Imperial forces began their systematic sweep of the colony. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the first teams reached this sector. There's another option, Micah said, his voice steady despite the fear. Clawing at his chest. We activate the colony's mining charges simultaneously. Create enough chaos and confusion to cover a mass evacuation while making it look like an industrial accident. That would work for the civilians. But the evidence is already on its way to the tribunal. We just need to survive long enough for them to receive it. Micah began connecting his workshop's computer systems to the colony's industrial network. The mining charges are designed to fracture asteroid surfaces for easier extraction. If we overload their containment systems, you're talking about destroying the entire colony. I'm talking about creating enough debris and electromagnetic interference to blind Imperial sensors while evacuation ships escape. His fingers flew across control surfaces, accessing systems he'd studied but never expected to use. The explosion will look like a catastrophic mining accident. No survivors to interrogate, no evidence to suppress. Selva watched him work with growing understanding. Except we'll be in the tunnels when those charges detonate. The deepest tunnels have emergency shelters designed to survive core breaches. We might make it. Might. Micah paused in his preparations to look at her directly. 3 years ago, you refused to murder 60 billion innocent people and became a fugitive. Today, I'm asking you to trust me to save 3,000 more. Sometimes redemption requires risking everything on might. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the workshop as Imperial troops approached. Salva raised her rifle, its targeting system painting threat indicators across her tactical display. Initiate evacuation protocols, she said. I'll buy you the time you need. But instead of heading for the rear exit, Micah moved to stand beside her. His own weapon, a modified plasma cutter from his workshop humming with dangerous energy. No, we do this together, or not at all. Through the workshop's reinforced windows, they could see Imperial troops taking up positions around the building. Purge troopers in black armor, weapons trained on every exit. But in the distance, emergency lights were already beginning to flash as evacuation protocols activated. Throughout the colony, surrender the fugitive, an amplified voice commanded. You have 30 seconds to comply. Selva looked at Micah, this quiet engineer who had designed the weapons that made her legendary and was now willing to die to help her find redemption. Whatever happens next, I want you to know I never wanted to be the monster they made. I know, Micah replied, his finger hovering over the detonation control. But maybe we can be something better. The workshop's main door exploded inward as Imperial troops breached the building. At the same moment, Micah triggered the mining charges. The asteroid shuddered as hundreds of simultaneous explosions tore through its structure. Rock and metal filled the air as emergency sirens wailed across the colony. In the chaos and confusion that followed, evacuation ships lifted off from their docking bays, disappearing into hyperspace before the Imperial fleet could react. In the deepest tunnel beneath the workshop, 2 unlikely allies huddled in an emergency shelter as the world came apart around them, hoping they had done enough to balance the scales of justice. 3 days later, the Galactic Tribunal received a courier drone containing evidence of the greatest war crimes in galactic history. The investigation that followed would topple governments and rewrite the history of the Syndicate. Wars, but that's a story for another day. Asterisk.